So I don't know how much awareness. I just assume everyone knows the same things I know about history, but I've come to learn that that's not always the best thing to assume. And so I'm going to just go through some basic history on PTSD. PTSD was actually really discovered initially during World War One, and I mean, I'm sure it's happened forever, and I'm sure there's stuff that's. But anyway, the first time a doctor ever actually studied and wrote about it, and they were trying to quantify it, was World War One, and it wasn't called PTSD then. It was called shell shock or irritable heart or soldier's heart, but mostly it was called shell shock. And they started to recognize these symptoms that were similar to issues if they had had a brain injury. And so they were afraid that the concussion sound of the bombs or something from the bombs was causing some sort of brain injury for soldiers. And so they started to study and try to quantify it. The problem was there were soldiers who were exhibiting these characteristics who had not been in close proximity of shells. They might have been further away, and so they weren't directly exposed to the impact or the air compression, of explosion of a bomb. And so it became one of those things where they would start designating people, okay, you've got shell shock, but it's because of actual physical trauma, and you just have mental issues. And there were even instances in World War One where individuals with shell shock were labeled as cowards and shot by their own side, which is just heart-wrenching to think of. So PTSD is actually a mental condition, and we'll go into a lot of that actual diagnosis and treatment and everything a little bit later. But I want to cover the history and discovering what they slowly discovered. So yeah, during World War One is when the first study was done. And then in World War II, they started to better identify the symptoms, but they changed the name to combat stress or battle fatigue. And and then it got put into the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders after that. So basically, it's just, a lot going on with this. So in World War II, they started to understand that it was a mental condition. Now, there were people who still thought it was cowardice or some poor constitution or whatever. And there are still people who think it is just your inability to deal with life. It's not. There is more to it than that. But the thing is, it's eminently treatable. It is eminently work throughable. Does not have to be the end of the world for you in your life or your loved ones. And that is the thing that I just wish could be shouted from the rooftops. So it became a little bit more normalized-ish during World War II. They started to really recognize there was an issue, but there wasn't a whole lot of support systems built in. And so the divorce rate post-World War II was rather significant due to issues with PTSD and stuff. I happen to know personally that a very close friend of my great-grandfather who served in World War II and was a prisoner of war and part of the Bataan Death March, when he came home was incredibly mentally unstable. He survived all of that and ended up with massive PTSD, but no one really knew how to help him. They all loved him, but they just didn't know how to help him. And he ended up just disappearing, and people don't really know what happened to him. So, unfortunately, that really was just, by that point, people were more compassionate towards the diagnosis and it, but just because they were compassionate towards it didn't mean they knew how to help. And thank goodness we live in a day and age where we have a lot more resources on how to help. Then in Vietnam, they started to, in Korea and post World War II, they started to notice that maybe individuals who were showing these symptoms should be pulled out of active combat to help them recover and deal with things. And over time, the military has built in massive resources, behavioral health and MFLAC, and just a lot of mental health resources for soldiers and their families. And they provide them themselves, and then there you can also go outside for if you need to. And I know people who have dealt with this situation and it's taken a while to find someone who can actually help, because as much as some therapists are just wonderful and great, there are just certain things you shouldn't say to a hardened combat veteran who's dealing with massive PTSD. Like, as a 24, 25-year-old, I completely understand what you're going through. Yeah, no, you don't. Just that's just not the thing to say. And I've heard that from a vet. That was like one of the things that the therapist said in the first session. He's like, and trying another one. That's not going to work for me. So he was like, I don't need you to act like you understand. I need you to help me process it. And so that is something, thank goodness, the military and society in general is recognizing more and more that post-traumatic stress is a genuine issue. Now, the other thing that ironically has come full circle is with modern medical technology, we've come to realize that there are individuals who exhibit the signs of PTSD, and it is because of a traumatic brain injury. So you can end up with a traumatic brain injury as a soldier or a civilian or a person and manifest the symptoms of PTSD, but really it's a physiological thing and not just a psychological thing. So understanding the cause of the PTSD is also incredibly important. And I thought that was interesting as I was reading through and prepping for this, because I kind of knew that was possible because, again, with being in the military, got lots of friends who've been in this. But the other thing is, I honestly, genuinely do believe that there are civilians who have PTSD. There are traumatic things that happen in people's lives. And I think that PTSD, and now I'm saying I think because I'm pretty sure this is quantifiable, but I don't have like a research right in front of me that says, yes, this is totally the facts. And so I don't want to give my opinion as a fact unless I know it is, quantifiable. But from what I am aware of, there's also different levels of PTSD, because post-traumatic stress can manifest in different levels of severity. It tends to be pretty obvious and pretty extreme in situations of combat veterans, just because of the intensity of what they're dealing with. But it's not limited to combat veterans, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. And also, I had another friend, and I'm going to just throw this out there because I feel like it needs to be said. He was particularly touchy about it being called a disorder. He's like, I don't feel like I have a disorder. I have post-traumatic stress and I'm dealing with it, because he felt like calling it a disorder made it a cop-out, like you were a victim and you should just, roll over and accept it. And I genuinely don't feel like that's what's meant with that labeling. However, I can see how someone would feel that way. It's not unsurmountable. It is totally livable, and people overcome it all the time. You just need help, and you need to know where to get the help. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. As I was doing research for this, I found a really interesting thing that I actually did not know existed, and it was through the VA. It is a PTSD National Center. They have an app, actually, and it's the PTSD Coach. And I'm going through this, and I will get back to the symptoms of PTSD for anyone who's concerned about a loved one. But anyway, the PTSD Coach is an app through the VA, and it has reliable information about PTSD and treatments that work, tools for screening and tracking your symptoms. It's convenient and easy to use, and direct links to support and help that will always be there when you need it. So I thought that was really interesting. It seems like nowadays, there's always an app for that. I feel like everything I ever talk, there's an app for that. Yeah, so I shouldn't have been surprised. There's an app for that. But yeah, the app is through the VA and it's called PTSD Coach. It's available through for Apple and Google, so Android and whatnot. So Android and iPhone for all you Apple lovers out there. But anyway, so I thought that was incredibly important. And then the other thing is just knowing how to recognize the symptoms. And that is a huge portion of just being able to help someone. So symptoms include intrusive memories, such as nightmares, flashbacks, recurring memories of an event, and emotional and physical stress upon their happening. So basically reliving that, whatever the traumatic event was. The next one is avoidance behavior, including avoidance of thoughts, conversations surrounding the event, as well as people, places, or other things that remind them of what happened. And this is understandable, but that's something you need to be aware of. Negative changes to thinking and mood can be forced. They can force them to experience memory loss regarding the traumatic event. And I had heard of this one previously. Basically, it's a temporary amnesia in regards to the traumatic event itself, which can be reversed. I don't know if it's always reversible, but I know it can be reversible. As well as hopelessness about themselves or their future, difficulty maintaining relationships, and struggles in experiencing positive emotions. And I've known individuals who are going through this who just said they felt dead. They couldn't feel sad. They couldn't feel happy. They couldn't feel anything. And that is it's just a tragic way to go through life. Changes in physical and emotional reactions, such as trouble sleeping, difficult concentrating, always being on their guard, becoming startled easily. Some people experience these symptoms when they hear unexpected loud noises, and it can cause them to be self-destructive, such as excessive drinking or other things, outbursts of anger as well. Outbursts of anger. And honestly, that is something that, again, a friend of ours who military and was dealing with it didn't realize he had PTSD actually until a soldier who was in his office who had never been deployed decided to put as his text alert or something, or his ring, the bomb warning klaxon that they had used in the field in a combat zone he had been in. And the kid knew this. He thought it would be funny. And so when it went off, my friend freaked out. And it just totally, he had a complete flashback to a point where he almost got killed because he had been out for a run and the klaxon, the alarm, the warning about an incoming missile came across. And what you were supposed to do was lay flat on the ground where you were, if you were outside, to minimize being hit by flying shrapnel. But he just got the feeling run, and he ran for the nearest building, and he barely got inside before it hit. And because he went inside, he survived, because the bomb ended up hitting just feet from where he would have laid down if he had laid down instead of running. And it wasn't until that alarm went off that he relived that instance and realized, oh my goodness, I have PTSD. Um, because took him totally back to that life or death and almost dying and everything. Um, and I know he had experienced it for some other things too, but that was the one that he had shared. And it just got me thinking how there are people out there who don't even realize they have PTSD until there's a trigger, until something, makes them realize it. And so that is something as friends and family that it's important to pay attention to, because your loved one may not even realize that they are going through this, just because they don't see it that way. They feel like they're still normal and handling things well. And it's not until they have an episode, until something triggers it, that they will realize that what's going on. And it's just being there and being supportive, because there are times where they will get irrationally upset or self-defensive or different things like that. Going back to my great-grandfather's friend who was a prisoner of war in World War II, he came to live with them for a while because he was struggling to get back on his feet with everything he was going through, with my great-grandparents, and my grandma and her sisters were young. And one day, they'd always been really close and good friends, and they'd gone to high school together, and so it was like no big deal. And one day my great-grandmother snuck up behind him while he was washing dishes, just to kind of, tease him, scare him, just playing around. She didn't think anything of it. And he had been watching a butcher knife, and he spun around and almost hurt her with it, because he had sensed her approaching and had immediately his brain went into defend yourself mode because of the PTSD. And it wasn't that he wanted to hurt anyone. It was just an auto response from the PTSD. And that was actually what caused him to, it was shortly after that where he's like, I've got to go. I can't stay here. I would never forgive myself if I hurt any of you. And that's when he disappeared and no one ever saw him again. And it breaks my heart, because it didn't have to be that way. But at the time, people just did not have the resources we have now. And so that's one reason why I really wanted to do this episode. I wanted to point out and make it just bring to light some of the things that happen, and just to understand that maybe they're going through this, your loved one, and that it's not just them being a jerk or them being sensitive or whatever, that they are really struggling and they genuinely need help. And that the thing is, thank goodness the treatments have improved so much, because when they were first trying to figure this out, they did like electrotherapy and put them on all sorts of drugs and all sorts of stuff. And those things were not helpful. But thank goodness now there are treatments that do work. They do have really good mental health professionals who are trained on how to do this. And so it does not have to be the end of the world that it used to be. And so, and I guess there still are some prescriptions and stuff I think that are used today with it, but I'm not 100% sure. I've heard anecdotally different like home remedies that are supposed to help treat PTSD. But again, this is such a severe and significant issue that I feel like it's important to go to a mental health professional and really get professional help. But yeah, so that's a little bit of more of a heavy topic. I know I go back and forth between heavy topics and more lighthearted ones, but it was definitely, with this being PTSD Awareness Month, I felt like it was important to highlight this and highlight that there are resources. There are mental health professionals who specifically work with veterans. There are a lot of just really good resources nowadays. And my goodness, there's an app for that. I mean, who would have thought? I guess, again, like I said, I shouldn't be surprised. This day and age, there's an app for everything. But there's an app So if you are struggling with that, or you have a loved one who is struggling with PTSD, please get help. Help them get help. Love and encourage them through this, because it is not easy and it is a long road. But if we can support and uplift each other, it is something that is completely doable. And it doesn't have to end like it did for my grandfather's friend. There can be better outcomes, and we need to help lovingly encourage our friends and loved ones. And if we're the one, we need to be courageous enough to get help, because it's when you get help that things really improve. That's what's so that's my little public service.